from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're listening to the CISO Talk Podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
What's happening, security gang? I've missed y'all so much. I took a year hiatus from the show. I took a year to get acquainted with my family. I was part of a very exciting startup that unfortunately didn't make it past 14 months. And so now the time has come after many fanfares going, when is CISO Talk coming back, to bring it back? And I couldn't think of a better first guest. I couldn't think of a better first guest for the first episode than my buddy, my pal, someone who's been on the show multiple times before, Mr. Patrick Benoit, the new CISO over at Brinks as well. So congratulations on the new role, Pat, and welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Always good to get together.
It's always fun to have you on. You know, the new show, the first, I've had you on so many times. We've typically gone into an hour and a half chat. The new season is 30-minute episodes, folks. So, quick, fast, we're going to get straight to it. But Pat, for our first-time listeners, people who may have not heard our previous episodes, which, by the way, will be linked in the show notes if you want to go, and you'll hear us talk about, our state of cyber that we did with our good buddy Mark Hopt. I've had Pat on multiple times in his roles at CBRE and other roles he's had before that. I think you were at Cheetah Digital, weren't you, before?
Yeah. Cheetah Digital was a really fun spinoff from Experian. It used to be Experian Marketing Solutions, and they spun it off and it became Cheetah Digital. Really fun kind of tech working in digital communications. So they're the guys that are sending all those emails out about the coupons and the discounts and sending SMS messages and popping up on your screen and stuff. Really,
so you're the reason I hate my phone and I hate marketers in general.
That's it.
You secured them, so I can't get to them and stop them.
Yeah. So, it was a really interesting experience. They have it was a fun company, and it was a good time to be there.
So Pat, for our audience, how long have you been doing security for?
Well, so it depends how you want to measure it, right? And I think you and I have had that conversation before. I've been in technology since the days of vacuum tubes. And so, I'm either vintage or antique, depending on how you want to look at it. And
I'm going to go with vintage.
Yeah, we'll go with vintage. And, I started out in programming technology and infrastructure and operations and all that kind of stuff like that. But eventually, as I started to manage, and in the mid to late 90s, security started to become a word that people would throw around from time to time, and definitely into early 2000s. And at that point, I owned IT for whatever companies I was with, and so it became like VP of IT and security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had that in smaller companies, and then eventually went to Dell. When I went to Dell Services, I again was working infrastructure for a while and did all that, and then became a delivery executive. And as a delivery executive, part of my remit included all the IT outsourced delivery for the infrastructure and security. So again, I had a person specifically dedicated to security, and I was involved in it there. Went to Experian, and we created this program we called a Executive Business Partner Program, which was effectively a BIO/BISO role. So it was that intermediary that worked at the business level for both technology and for the CIO and for the CISO. And then, obviously spun off was the deputy CISO, and then worked at CBRE running their GRC and BISO program. So official security titles, maybe 5 or 6 years. Owning security as a remit, forever and ever, since it became real.
Yeah, and I think, you and I've had this conversation plenty of times before. Being a security practitioner doesn't entail a title. The reason we all went into security, I think, and most of our listeners went into security, and most first-time people that listen to the show are considering or going into security is because we're security-minded by nature.
Yes.
Right? We see something and we're thinking, how could we break it? And then how do I stop it from breaking? How do I stop myself from breaking it? So you and I, we've had our fair share of disagreements, and it's made for lively conversations. Today's podcast is no different. You kind of pinged me and you were like, you're really wrong about this whole Uber CISO breach thing. I disagree with you. And I was like, well, let's have that conversation. And like many people know, I don't shy away from a debate or a conversation with different points of view. I think that's the essence of practicing good security.
Sure.
In fact, I think smart CISOs, right? Smart leaders hire people who disagree with them in order to make their ideas better, right? If I can get you to believe my point of view, then by all means, I've convinced the unconvincible, right?
Yeah. And you just become a fanboy at that point if you're just agreeing with everything. So.
Well, and there's I would like to say that the essence of failure is the consistency of yes.
Right. I would agree.
And so there's that. So to give our audience a little background, the former CISO over at Uber was charged with felony counts, convicted by a jury of his peers, and is awaiting sentencing. For not allegedly anymore, because he's been convicted of it. They found him guilty of hiding a data breach and trying to cover it up. And for those who just don't know my views, you can go back and listen to any one of the CyberHub podcasts with the title Uber on them, and you can kind of get my point of view. I'm not going to bore you with mine, because you'll shortly find out why Pat and I kind of see differently on this. Pat, I'll hand it over to you. Where am I wrong?
And I think, and I would never quote say you're wrong, but I think you have framed the charges incorrectly. If you read the actual charge sheets, he was charged with perjury, basically lying under oath was one charge, and the second charge was I forget the technical term, but effectively knowing that a felony was in progress and not reporting it. Is effectively what that charge means. So in my mind, when somebody comes to you and says, you're under oath, raise your hand, and you sort of tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and you decide to lie, that has nothing to do with hey, we had a breach. That has to do with we have a serious ethical problem at that point, or just weak character. And I'm willing to extend grace and say, he felt like he was put in a position that he had no choice but to lie. Okay, fine. But the choice was, I just was told. It's not like I told a lie when somebody just asked me a question. It's they just told me I'm under oath, and I decided to lie anyway. So that's where we differ in that framing of what the charges actually were.
So, yeah, I mean, his own people did testify against him, right? And Joe Sullivan, to frame this for full disclosure and for the sake of honest debate, was a federal prosecutor. In fact, he was prosecuted by the office he used to run, by people that were his peers and his employees. So he knows better.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the
standard. He knows where the line was, and he stepped over. So,
see, to me, my issue, and I don't disagree with those facts, because I think those are proven facts beyond the court, even in the charging paperwork and the actions thereafter. I feel like he was scapegoated into this, because the general counsel should have been charged, the CEO should have been charged, the board of directors should have held some liability, because they all knew semi what's going on. And what I felt like, I was watching, where's this link? Because I was watching everything through courthousenews.com, right? And I'll put that link, by the way, for people in the show notes, because that's where I read, because that's where people were transcribing what was going on in the trial every single day. And that's what I kind of used for point of reference for testimony. They never once reached out to those individuals and really fully deposed them. And then what the judge did allow in evidence didn't afford him a fair opportunity, I think, a defense. Because they construed that his conversations with the board and executive leadership would be hearsay, yet everyone talking to him about it wouldn't be hearsay.
That's true. And there is this distinction. And again, I always preface this by saying I'm not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer. I did stay at Holiday Inn Express, but I'm not sure that qualifies me. But having said that, there is a clear distinction between what's admissible to determine guilt or innocence against the charge, and what's admissible to determine the latitude in terms of sentencing. And so to me, those kinds of things where you bring in, oh, well, I kind of was in a bad position. They told me to do this. They told me to do that, et cetera, et cetera. I think those things could be, mitigating factors in sentencing, but it's never an affirmative defense to say somebody told me to commit a crime. I mean, that never flies.
No, and I agree with that. I don't think that, again, I think that the defendant bench should have had at least 2 more heads on that.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it's all semantics and stuff, but we get into this discussion of technically he never got charged with anything to do specifically with the breach.
Well,
not a single thing.
One Uber was under an FTC consent order at the time.
Right.
No different than what happened to Mudge over at Twitter. Right. Sure. I mean, now we know this week why Mudge went and became a whistleblower. Right. We're slowly starting to uncover why Mudge went and signed a deal to become a whistleblower.
Yeah, non-retaliation, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Well, because likely he saw what was going on with Joe Sullivan. And I think for a lot of us as CISOs, you kind of look at that and you go, I'd never do it.
Yeah.
But then if we're never put in that position, we would never know. I think people do different things when they're in a position. It's very easy for us to Monday morning quarterback this. I say that about myself as well. I'm concerned, and my concern isn't about Joe's innocence or guilt. I trust our judicial system, and some people may find that ironic or challenge me on whether or not I do, but I do. I believe that when you're charged and you're in front of a jury of your peers, it is what it is, and our judicial system corrects its wrongs, even if they're done later. Even if they're done 20 years later, we've seen our judicial system correct its wrongs over time if it was wrong. I'm concerned with the precedent this sets in terms of prosecuting information security officers when we don't have necessarily all the legal protections or the corporate status to be allowed to defend ourselves. And I think that's my challenge with Joe's case, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he was given a fair chance to defend himself. I think he got a short end of a stick.
Yeah.
Right. They kind of threw everything at him and let him have it. And then everyone lawyered up, but essentially he had to sue Uber to get money so that he can have legal representation for the charges he got.
Right.
I mean, they literally abandoned him, and I think they were part of that decision-making process. I really think Uber cut a lot of corners and used Joe, and Joe knew it was wrong.
Sure.
But what Joe probably thought to himself, and I haven't spoken to Joe about this, right? So what Joe probably thought is, I may have a chance.
Yeah.
They'll back me up. We'll be able to say this was a company decision. Board signed off on it. We felt like we could trust these people to pay them a bug bounty program. They would erase the data. There'd be nothing wrong with that. Yeah. And sweep it under the rug, move on, because the company was on teeters when this happened to Uber.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's one thing people need to realize.
And I think that's all okay up to that point.
But he wasn't allowed to present that in court, right? And I think that's part of my problem.
Because, and I agree with you, and I really don't disagree that the way we got there and the impact that's going to come out of it is all very valid. And we can go over it over and over and over again. Once somebody said, raise your hand and swear, it should have been every man for himself at that point in time. And if nobody was advising Joe, he should have found somebody to advise him that, no, you cannot go perjure yourself in that situation.
He should have known better. He should have known better.
He should have. If he was a prosecutor, he should have known better. You're right.
He should have known.
But
I don't fault him there, and I don't fault the charge to do it.
Right.
Because our justice system is one very clear thing, right? No one is above the law in this country. Right. And I know we're in a tense political time, and some people may say, James, that's BS. That's not what, no one is above the law in this country. Him being a former prosecutor, I think the standard was higher expected of him, and therefore that's why the charges came.
Probably true.
Now, he should have settled this This should have never gone to trial.
Yeah.
Right. Number one. Number two, when things started to escalate, he continued to lie, and he should have came clean.
Yeah.
And I think there's one thing about being caught in a lie and coming clean, where there's a tendency to want to work with someone who does that. You and I have been in those positions in leadership where you may have had someone on your team who's, misled you in a way. You catch them in it, and if they come out of it, they admit their fault, they come out of it, you go, it's a teaching moment, move on. If they don't understand their story, and that's someone who you're potentially now talking to HR about replacing, terminating, putting them on some sort of corrective action. And really that trust that was built over time is gone. And I think that's what ultimately happened to Joe.
The real big point you bring out, though, that's important is the impact it's going to have, because what it's going to cause is for CISOs, well, two things. One is misplaced faith. If you ever think that your company is going to make a decision and throw themselves under the bus for you, then you've missed the point. And that's not that they're being bad people. That their interest has to lie first in the stakeholders in the company, period. So you will always fall last if it comes down to that fine a decision. So don't misplace that faith. And the second is, there's going to be a lot of CISOs out there, especially those that have not been in significant executive positions over time or leadership positions, where they are willing to stand up for that leadership, that ethical position, that are going to run scared. And as a result of running scared, they're not going to always make the best decisions going forward for the program, because they're going to be making decisions to protect themselves, not necessarily the best decision to protect the company.
And I think the effects of Joe are already felt. And I brought up that one example. I think the reason Mudge became a whistleblower at Twitter, I think the reason Parag, the moment Parag fired him, he became a whistleblower. He went because he knew. Twitter is under an FTC consent order.
Right.
We now know that they're going to have to deal with the fallout of this, and I think, my hope is with the Twitter case. I think there's an opportunity for the San Francisco federal prosecutors, the California federal prosecutors, to do corrective action here. There is. Go after Parag and Jack Dorsey, because they knew all of this stuff was going on in Twitter.
Yeah.
He wouldn't sign off on it, so he resigned. He got fired, aka resigned, got fired, whatever the case may be. And go after those CEOs for hiding this or trying to get their security team to not report this. And I think with his whistleblower complaint and the evidence he's got, if they don't charge the leadership at Twitter, the former, not the current leadership of Twitter, but the former leadership of Twitter, for those guys, if you and I don't wake up one morning and the highlight of my CyberHub podcast is Parag gets arrested for forcing Mudge to lie or asking Mudge to lie and Mudge refusing to do so, and he's not being charged with perjury, obstruction, defying a consent order, that'll be a sad day. I think that's that's the corrective action.
Yeah, and I hope to never be in that position, just like you said, but it's a tough thing to believe that karma and the universe is going to take care of you when you have to walk away from a well-paid job that you've been at for any number of years. And what's that going to mean for the short term for you and your family? So that's to me different level. So not an exact comparison, but if somebody goes out and steals bread to feed their family, I have to treat that with a different view of grace. Did they commit a crime? Yes, they did. What's the outcome? What's the consequence of that crime? Maybe then I can show some compassion at that point. But I always try to just apply my 4 rules. And if you haven't read the book, I'll plug the book. It's an old book. It's called The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And basically 4 rules. And I tell my team this at the very beginning always. Number 1, highest integrity. Always be as honest as you possibly can. And I tell them, I will tell you everything I can tell you. And if I can't tell you, I will tell you I can't tell you. Number 2, nothing is personal. So when James gets up in the morning and calls me on the phone and starts ranting at me about, how much he dislikes something I've done. It's not me, it's James. So don't take it personally. That doesn't mean I have to take it. I can say, look, James, when we can have a civil conversation, let's continue. But it's not about me. It's about what's going on with James. And number 3, never make assumptions. Make observations, gather facts, gather information, and make an informed decision. Best decision you can make with what you have, but don't assume. Listen first. And the fourth, always do your best. But if you're always doing your best, then how can I ever fault you? I can come to you as a leader and say, your best isn't good enough. So I either need to train you better, give you more of the tools that you need to be better, but I can't look at you and say, you're not doing, you're nothing. You're doing your best. So it's up to me to make you, as a leader, to make you more productive then. So that's my 4 rules, 4 agreements.
That's beautiful 90 seconds, by the way. Like brilliant 90 seconds right there. That's going to become a short clip for this podcast, right? Because that's just beautiful 90 seconds about 4 rules and about leadership that I think is so critical. Looking at, we talked a little bit about Joe. I've talked a bit about Mudge, and I'm watching the Twitter one really, closely at this point, for a multitude of reasons. But I think that the Twitter's the corrective action for a lot of us in security is, if bad leadership undermines security, is bad leadership going to face the consequences like Joe did, right? Parag, as CEO of the company, knew very well they were under FTC consent orders at Twitter. He knew full well that there were people that were impacted by this. So, it'll be interesting. And something tells me there was a clause in the acquisition between Elon Musk and the Twitter leadership around the FTC fines that are going to be coming as a result of this, coming off of their escrow, the $44 billion he paid for the company.
It's as if we learned nothing from Enron, though. Nothing.
No, and you kind of see the same with FTX and so many others. I mean, the crypto market crash to me in security is potentially the last 2 weeks have potentially been the most interesting when it comes to how cyber criminals are now operating, right? Because what was very traditionally Bitcoin and crypto, with the market crashing, the value of crypto going away, and the fact that a lot of people are cashing out their wallets or lost all of their money, and liquidity's gone. I mean, multiple BlockFi just went bankrupt as well. Right. I mean, FTX is kind of the 2008 market collapse, where FTX, you can consider them Lehman Brothers. Once Lehman Brothers went down, it was just a row of companies where almost AIG failed and so many others, that Bear Stearns that went out as well. You can look at, what's going on in the crypto market now. It's very interesting. And I think as a CISO, this is a really interesting point, because as criminals look for other means of payment outside of crypto, because crypto no longer has the same protections and value. What does that mean to the negotiations you now have with criminals? And could we be looking at a return of money laundering through, what I like to call the good old send it to, multiple bank accounts and hope one of them, doesn't get blocked by the Secret Service in time.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
It's really, really interesting. All right. Pat, we're going to get to the fun part of the show. My favorite part of the show. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to take full advantage of it. We're wrapping up 2022. 2023 is coming along. My famous buzzword graveyard. You've buried a bunch of words in the buzzword graveyard. What word would you bury for 2023 in the buzzword graveyard, and why?
There's probably a couple. I would probably lean towards burying ransomware as a buzzword, because it doesn't do justice to what's really happening. It's become an overarching, term that's just thrown out there, helter skelter, about somebody got into your network and they encrypted your files and they're going to charge you money. Well, it's way more complex than that, because it doesn't tell you about the fact that, they got into your network because of some vulnerability or vector that was left open because you're not paying attention to your basic hygiene to begin with. So it's kind of, and now we're starting to use it as, it is a victim crime. Don't get me wrong when I say this, but it's a victim crime that if we would pay attention to our basics, at least we would have a better chance of preventing it. But just like any attack, the attack vectors for ransomware are the same attack vectors for virtually every other attack that we have. So I think we're holding it up to this high standard as it's something special. And the reality is it's more complex than that.
Yeah. It's interesting. You said you've got a few words. The first one was ransomware. What's the second one?
I would probably go with zero trust. And again, because it's a word that is thrown around and marketing buzz, much like AI used to be. That was one of your favorites too, AI and ML. And it's thrown around, and in that throwing it around, we misplace the fact that it's a concept. It's not a specific, put these 4 bolts and nuts in place and you have zero trust. It is a concept on how to architect and how to design and how to build your systems and manage your systems. And we lose sight of that because every product we have out there has got zero trust stamped across the front as if it was keto now,
Well, it's kind of like the Microsoft and Palo Alto drinking well, right? When you've got two very big companies now pushing everything around zero trust, and I just did the Microsoft CISO workshop.
Yeah.
And it was all around zero trust architecture around Azure, right?
Yeah.
Kind of how to leverage Azure Azure AD and all the different kind of tools and security tools within Microsoft for a zero trust network.
Right.
I think, I agree with you around zero trust. It's really a philosophy rather than a buzzword.
It is.
It's often misused. Our good buddy George just wrote a book on it. Over at SMU.
George Finney. Yeah.
Yep. So George Finney just wrote a book around Project Zero Trust and whatnot. And I think, in George's book, he kind of nails what zero trust is really all about beyond the buzzword and beyond the hype. The challenge is, I think, CEOs of cybersecurity vendors, AKA, the good ones are our security partners, will probably buy his book to their marketing team and say, understand what this is.
Yeah.
Right.
That would be a good
Read
idea.
this, stop putting it on our website, and marketing it thinking it's going to get us anything. It's not. It makes you feel good, but really it creates head shakes in meetings.
Exactly.
So Pat, what's the book you're reading right now? Are you reading anything?
Oh yeah, I actually am, and it's a book called Make Noise. And funny thing, you will appreciate this. It's specifically targeted at. I'm gonna get the name for you here. It's Make Noise: A Creator's Guide to Podcasting and Great Audio Storytelling. It's by a gentleman named Eric Nuzum, Nuzum. And what's so fascinating about it is he is focused on the idea of podcast, but he's really focused on the idea of audio storytelling. And he has a whole section on storytelling and scenes and characters and protagonists and complications and resolutions and twists and all that stuff like that. And so I think it's a very, very good book for any CISO that wants to learn to tell a story. And if you're not a CISO that wants to learn to tell a better story, then you probably shouldn't be a CISO, because our whole life is about telling stories.
I couldn't agree more about being able to tell a story and being able to explain yourself and explain what you're doing.
Right.
I couldn't agree more. Finally, last song. If you pulled up your iPhone right now, you're looking at your music. What's the last thing you listen to?
It wouldn't be on my iPhone, but it would be on my Oculus headset, because when I worked out this morning, the last song I did some boxing to was a song called Ready for Your Love by Gorgon City. So there you go. That's off the beaten trail, right?
Love it. Pat, thanks for coming on the show, buddy. I really appreciate you. Good luck in your new position over at Brinks. They're lucky to have you. You're one of the brightest voices we have in our community. So grateful to be able to share it here with you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity and the honor to be on the show. And, we always have a great time. And anytime, anything you need, just let me know.
I appreciate you, Patrick. Thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure to subscribe to CISO Talk. Share this episode with your friends, colleagues, anyone who you think would get benefit from it. And Pat, you're on LinkedIn, correct?
Correct. It's I think on LinkedIn it's under Patrick L. Benoit, Benoit.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll link Pat's LinkedIn, but please don't spam them in the show notes as well. But please don't spam them for the love of all things precious. Please don't spam Pat. Thanks y'all. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in to CISO Talk.
Take care.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.